Hey everyone, and welcome to Paperback Journeys, where today I'm going to be talking about the 8 books that I read in the month of August, which one was my favourite, which one was my least favourite, and then we'll update the top 10 list of the year to see if any of this month's reading has made the list. If you can hear any sort of like snorting or snuffling in the background, it's because my little French bulldogs are pretty worked up today because my wife is taking care of a cat and they can smell the cat on her. So they're a bit like, where is it? Where is it? Also, if I'm a little bit worked up today, it's because my team, West Ham United, are at the very rock bottom of the league. They're playing in about a couple of hours, and so I need to quickly hurry up so I can go and watch them lose, and then I can just be in a depression for the rest of the day. So that's the kind of mood we're working with today. Also, at the end of the video, I'm going to be giving out a prize to the person who came closest to guessing what I would be rating all of the books that I read for this month. This month, I read some really unusual books, and I can't wait to tell you about them. But let's talk about the first book that I read, and that was Summer of Night by Dan Simmons. Summer of Night is a horror novel that's set in Elm Haven, Illinois in the summer of 1960. School is just let out for summer vacation, and at the center of this kind of like small American town is this building called Old Central. Old Central is this massive, looming, century-old school building. And what we find out at the beginning of the book is that this school is going to be closing down for good. They're going to tear down the building. And so when the book starts, the kids are all excited, you know, they're ready to be riding around town on their bikes, playing, having fun, all summer vacation. You remember what that felt like, right? The first day of summer holidays. It was the best. It was the best. And so like they're in a great mood. But then a young boy named Tubby disappears. Very unfortunate nickname, that, Tubby. But yeah, Tubby disappears after he slips into the basement of Old Central, and he's not seen again. And their summer plans go from riding on their bikes, having fun, playing baseball, all that kind of thing, to now we're gonna investigate and find out what happened to Tubby. This book is like a lot of books I've been reading recently. It's filled with nostalgia, but it's also got more of an eerie kind of a tone. I think you could very easily compare this to Boy's Life that I read last month. Last month, by the way, Boy's Life became one of my favorite books of all time. I loved it. It's a top 10 read of all time. Summer of Night wasn't quite as good as that, but it is definitely on the darker side. You know, it's not quite as light-hearted as Boy's Life is. Another book that you could easily compare this to is It. I think maybe more than any other book, people would compare this to It. It's just an impossible comparison to avoid. The group in this book really do feel as though they all have direct counterparts from the Losers Club. If you've read Stephen King's It, you've got like the leader, the little brother, the wisecracker, the kind of chubby, nice kid, the outcast girl that doesn't really fit in with the other girls, and so she kind of hangs out with the boys. I'd say the pacing of this book is quite slow to begin with. It's probably about 200 pages before the supernatural elements start to properly arrive. So I think in order to enjoy this book, you have to enjoy a lot of detail and a lot of building of atmospheric tension. You have to be into that sort of thing. When like the supernatural horror elements finally arrive, there are scenes that genuinely like gave me chills. Simmons' writing style is really strong. The dialogue, I think, is one of the highlights of the book. It feels really natural. The way that he captures this sort of mixture of doubt and guilt and excitement and fear in the kids is really spot on, and I think that he's able to kind of recreate that sort of turbulent feeling of childhood just before you enter your teen years. Again, it's a bit slower than I would have liked, but the payoff I think worked well enough to make me glad that I spent a summer in Elm Haven, Illinois. Yeah, I like this one. I didn't love it. I'm not going to say I loved it, but I did like it. The next book that I read in August was Bury Your Gaze by Chuck Tingle, and I just love this cover. Like, I really love this cover. So Bury Your Gaze is a horror novel that really feels unlike anything else that I've read in the genre. The main character is a guy named Misha, who is a successful Hollywood screenwriter. He's kind of like riding high after an Oscar nomination and a hit TV series. So, you know, things are going well until the studio execs step in with a demand that he kill off all of his gay characters. And the reason that they want him to do this is because they've done a little bit of research. They're using this new algorithm that says that if they do this, this, and this, then it will bring in more viewers. And if they have this dramatic death of the gay characters in his TV series, then yeah, it's going to get more eyes on the screen. And Misha just refuses. He first thing is he's tired of seeing queer characters sort of treated like disposable props. He doesn't like that trope that happens in a lot of especially horror, and also more than anything, he hates the thought of letting an algorithm decide what's going to be happening in his stories based on what's going to trend online. You know, he doesn't. He wants to maintain the authenticity of the story that he has in mind. But and I've got to be careful here because I don't want to spoil anything, right? So I don't want to reveal too much. But that choice has consequences, and soon all of the characters that he's ever written from his horror TV shows and his movies, they start bleeding into the real world and following him through the streets of Los Angeles, through the Hollywood Hills. And at first, he sort of thinks to himself, oh, these are like obsessive fans that are doing some really convincing cosplay. Uh, and maybe he thinks he's being stalked by like super fans. But then the danger becomes a lot more real. And it becomes obvious to him that actually this is really happening. Like a supernatural event is happening to me. This is a very fast-paced book. It's quite short as well. Probably, I reckon you can read it maybe in a few days, and it feels very like of the moment. It talks about stuff like the collapse of old Hollywood, you know, and the Hollywood superstars, and the growing threat of artificial intelligence to people who have jobs in a creative field. Also talks about the way that corporations try to micromanage every element of life, especially creativity, to the point where, you know, for the sake of profit, they suck all of the soul out of movies and out of books and out of TV shows, and because they're just trying to make a little bit more in the margins, you know. So yeah, I liked a lot of the themes of the book. With that said, though, I didn't find it very scary. There were flashes of humor as well, but nothing that made me really laugh out loud. I don't think it was really my sense of humor, you know. But yeah, I would say it was okay. But the biggest thing I felt when reading this book was that this would just work better as a movie. And it almost felt as though it was a bit of a movie pitch in a way. You know, like Chuck Tingle kind of wrote this as to sort of go like, oh, wouldn't, you know, this would be a pretty good movie, wouldn't it? Netflix? Which is quite ironic, really, given the context of the story. But yeah, it was all right, you know? The next book that I read, I don't have a physical copy of it. I just had it on ebook, and that was A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. So, A Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes is set in the world of the Hunger Games, and it's actually a prequel. It's set 64 years before Katniss Everdeen entered into the games. And in this book, we follow 18-year-old Cornelius Snow. Is it Coriolanus or Cornelius? It's Coriolanus Snow, I think. This is like a 18, 19-year-old version of President Snow. At the very beginning of the book, in the opening scenes, we see that his sort of like once great capital family is crumbling, and he's desperate to sort of claw back his way into wealth and into the power that his family used to be known for and the influence. And so when he gets an assignment to mentor a tribute in the 10th annual Hunger Games, a character named Lucy Gray from District 12, he sort of sees this as his chance to restore his name. If he can do a good job in being a mentor, and if his tribute in the Hunger Games can do a good job, then he's going to reestablish himself and also his family as someone to be kind of reckoned with. So this book has been out for a little while, and I didn't jump on it right away because I have to be honest, when this first came out, I wasn't exactly racing to pick it up. I liked the original trilogy when it first came out about, what was it, like 15 years ago, something like that? Time flies, doesn't it? But I just wasn't interested enough in President Snow to want to know his origin story. But then recently, earlier this year, the Sunrise on the Reaping came out, which is the story of Haymitch. And I'm much more interested in Haymitch. He was my favorite character from the Hunger Games. And so what I decided was, if I'm going to read that book, I really should read this book as well, kind of in preparation. First as like a refresher into the world of Panem, but also just in case anything is referenced that I won't understand, you know? So yeah, really, I read this book so that I could properly enjoy Sunrise on the Reaping. And I do plan to read that before the end of this year. So for this book, I really liked the opening scenes of the book. Seeing Panem's history from the perspective of the capital was really interesting. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not like all of a sudden like, oh, I'm a capital fanboy. And now I'm like, oh, actually, District 12 is a bit out of order. Like, why don't they just follow the rules? You know, like that, I'm not, that's not me. But I think it is interesting how occupying forces are able to rewrite their history to make them look like victims and sort of like make themselves feel like the heroes in the narrative when they're so clearly the villains. I thought that was really interesting. Snow's family situation was some of my favorite stuff. From the outside, their home is pristine and it looks really glamorous. I'm talking about their physical, their house that they live in. But when you go inside, it's all stripped bare. It's full of cobwebs and echoes, which I thought was just a great analogy for the family itself. His grandmother as well, I thought was interesting. He lives with his grandmother along with his cousin. By the way, I thought it was really interesting who his cousin was. That was a good reveal. I won't say who it is, just in case you haven't read the book. But yeah, it was interesting to me who his cousin was. But yeah, his grandmother is sort of interesting because she's clinging on to the past, and she thinks in her mind that they're still sort of like this powerful family that's lording over all the others. But in reality, they can't afford food to eat. And so because of all of this, Coriolanus just feels this crushing weight of restoring their family name, all while literally starving. And whenever they have any of these like big banquets and stuff like that for all of the mentors for the Hunger Games, he's just like kind of storing up on all the food, but trying to not make it look obvious. Yeah, I thought that was really good scenes. All of those opening scenes I really liked. Lucy Gray, the character from District 12, I thought was a solid character. She sort of brings some romance into the story. And honestly, knowing what the capital does to the districts, that sort of like romance element of the story for me felt like a little bit of a stretch. I was kind of thinking, would this happen? You know, would the characters feel like this? I don't know. Also, I think in the movie, Lucy Gray is played by, is it Rachel Ziegler? Is that her name? So I'll probably watch the movie at some point. I quite like Rachel Ziegler in a couple of the films that she's been in. I've only seen like one or two films with her, but she's always pretty good. When the book actually reaches the section where the Hunger Games themselves are being played, that section of the book I thought was weirdly like the least interesting. I sort of didn't care once the games got started because I only really knew Lucy Gray. And so I didn't really know who the other competitors were. So when people were dying in the games, I was like, okay, I sort of don't know who that was really, Didn't feel that connection. Also, when you got to the end, it felt a little bit scattered. Like the story was trying to juggle too many plot lines at the same time. And then right at the end, it just sort of dropped them all. One other thing that, in my opinion anyway, that the book sort of failed to do was capture the moment where Coriolanus Snow tips fully into cruelty. That never really landed in like what I consider to be like a satisfying way. His corruption didn't really feel convincing, which I thought that was going to be the whole point of the book. A making a monster moment. I thought that was going to be the point, but yeah, it didn't really happen that way exactly. I'm glad I read it, and it definitely set me up to dive into The Sunrise on the Reaping. So I'll be interested to read that. So at this point in the month, just to give you like a vibe of how I'm feeling when I reach this stage of the month after the first three, I was starting to think to myself, this is a bit of a mid-month. This is like not that great. And so I was starting to worry a little bit that I wasn't going to find a really great book to talk about. But as I started to reach towards the end of the month, the books started to improve. I started to read a good couple of books that sort of saved everything at the end of the month. But the next book that I read was also an ebook as well. And that book was It Lasts Forever and Then It's Over by Anne D. Macron. So this book is a zombie apocalypse story, but it's sort of interesting because it flips the perspective. Instead of following the humans that are trying to survive the zombie apocalypse, as we usually see, in this book, we see the world through the perspective of the zombies. And these zombies are a little bit different to what we're used to. They're still hungry for flesh. Their bodies are still rotting and falling apart, but they're able to think. They're able to feel emotions, and they're actually able to talk to one another as well. For most of the book, it takes place in this hotel where a handful of these zombies all live together after the world collapses. In my mind, I was just assuming really that this is where all of the zombies were when the zombie apocalypse happened. And so they just sort of stayed there. They're all living in this little community in the hotel, and they're watching themselves decay, and they're trying to sort of make sense of what they are and who they used to be. The main character doesn't remember her own name. Sometimes she just sort of borrows a name. She just kind of comes up with one like, oh, maybe I'll call myself Sandra, or maybe I'll call myself Bethany today, just to sort of see if it feels right. This book is a little bit tragic in a way, because she can remember some of her life before. She knows, for example, that she had a husband, but she can't remember his name. She can't remember his face. Every now and then she'll have little flashbacks of her mundane life before she turned into this creature. Uh, she can remember episodes of reality television that she used to watch. She can remember being at dinner parties, things like that. And then bang, like she's back in the moment and she's in this hotel and she's missing an arm and she's kind of like, oh yeah, I used to be a person. You can read this as an out and out zombie book, but I think it also works as a metaphor for aging in a way. Like you've got your memory fading, your body's failing, you're becoming isolated. You don't have all the people around you that you used to know. You're struggling to connect to the world that feels less and less familiar. It's sort of eerie, but like I say, it's pretty sad. The writing style is going to be a little bit divisive. I think it's a stream of consciousness. It's really written as the main character sort of talking to her lover that she can only half remember, and she often says things like. Kind of speaking in the second person, right? So she'll say, "Oh, you would have laughed if you would have seen this. You would have loved this. I wonder if you would still love me if you saw me now." You know that. So it's written in a kind of second person, almost as though she's writing a letter to this person that she can't remember. There's not really a clear plot, so if that's important to you, maybe give this one a miss. It's just really glimpses of the past and then immediate reactions to the present. It's, do you know what I would describe it as? It's rather than a story, I don't think you can exactly call it a story. Reading this is more like an experience. It's like stepping inside what it might actually feel like to be a zombie. And for that reason, I think that it would be best enjoyed if you just read it in one sitting because it's pretty short. It's just a little novella. I think it is the shortest thing that I read this month. And so, yeah, you would probably be able to read this in a few hours if you wanted to. But yeah, I liked it. It was different. The next book that I read was The Buffalo Hunter Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. So this is the book that the PBJ Book Club chose for us to all read together for the month of August. This book is a unique take on a vampire story with lots of other elements in it to keep it fresh. The opening scene is set in the present where a young journalism professor named Etsy stumbles on a journal of her great 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 grandfather. Inside of these journal pages, we get his account of life in Montana's frontier days. It's set in the early 1900s, but also it kind of goes back further than that as well, because as he's writing it, he's kind of an older man, right? So he's talking about his history and stuff like that. And her great great grandfather is a Lutheran pastor. And then we get like another layer in the journal entries where we meet a Native American character named Goodstab who shares his life story as well through a series of confessions to the pastor. I'm afraid that when I say the word pastor, because of my accent, you're thinking about bolognese. Um, I'm talking about a pastor, right? A Lutheran pastor, but I have a ridiculous accent. So it sounds like I'm talking about fettuccine. So yeah, this is one of those books that is a story within a story within a story. It's not as complicated as it sounds though. I'd say probably 90% of this book just alternates between Arthur Beauchamp, who is the great-great-grandfather, and Goodstab, who's talking about his past. It kind of like rocks back and forth between these two stories. That's basically what we're getting. In his very first confession, Goodstab lets us know that long ago, he was transformed into a vampire. And he tells the story of how that happened. And from here, we are taken on a journey of his transformation and how he adapted to it, how he was kind of rejected by his own kind and he didn't feel like he was a part of them anymore, and how he learned the rules of his new existence. And today, he's kind of like haunted by his what he's done in his past and what he's become, and he's furious at the settlers who are destroying his culture and taking over his homeland. And so this is sort of like half gothic vampire story, half Native American revenge plot. And I think in that way, Good Stab is both the victim and the monster, and the hero and the villain. He's kind of like all these things. And so that tension makes him a really interesting and complicated character. And I liked him a lot. This book, when we were reading it over the course of this month, it seemed like a really popular pick. The one thing which I think was a little bit difficult for some people early on, myself included, was sort of getting used to Stephen Graham Jones's unique writing style. But after the first couple of chapters, I sort of found the rhythm and I started to enjoy it a lot more. I think if you like vampire stories and you're kind of like a little bit used to the plot points, all right, now this is going to happen, now this is going to happen, then this might be a good pick for you, especially with October just around the corner. If you want a unique vampire story, then this, I think, would be a pretty good pick. The next book that I read was Rejection by Tony Tulitamute. So this, oh man, this book, I really like this book. So this is a collection of 7 interconnected short stories about people being rejected in different ways. The people in this book are a collection of the strangest, most annoying people that you can imagine, but also in some cases you start to not relate to them, hopefully, but you do feel for them. You do feel for them. A lot of them are just sort of victims of the time that they live in, and the time that we live in, because this is set like in 2024, 2025. Their problems are very specific to right now. Their problems couldn't exist without the internet. Like, for example, one of the stories is about a guy that is addicted to self-development and productivity podcasts. Another is about a woman who just can't stop comparing her life to the social media postings of a guy that she had a one-night stand with that she met through an app. Another is about an incel that finds an online community, and another is about a dude who has just watched way too much strange and unusual online pornography, and now he has unrealistic ideas of what sex is supposed to be. All of these characters are like a house of broken dolls, and the thing that has broken their brains is the internet. As much as all of these characters are, in a lot of cases, quite unpleasant people, and they definitely be annoying to be around, they're fascinating to read about. And one of the reasons for that is because of how well Tulitamute is sort of made them feel like real people. They're some of the most vivid, fully fleshed out, and realistic characters that I've read about in a long time. I think that some of them are going to feel maybe a little bit too close for comfort, might feel a little bit too familiar. Like, I feel everyone has a friend that talks too much about an ex that wasn't even really their ex. Like, they just kind of had a fling with them, but they just can't get over it. Or they have a dude at work who just can't stop talking about life hacks and the new Atomic Habits book that he just read. I mean, self-development's great and all that. I'm not against self-development or anything, but you know those people that are just too into it, where you're just like, all right, man, there's more to life than this. So all of the characters have their own stories, but also what's interesting is how they sometimes drift into each other's stories as well. Sometimes they reappear in later chapters as a side character, or maybe one of the characters from a previous story shows up for a blind date with a character from this story. And so, yeah, they're all kind of intermingling. And I thought that was a lot of fun as well. This is a satirical book. The satire works because it's both funny, like laugh out loud funny, and deeply sad. These people are unusual, but they're not aliens, you know? They're just exaggerated versions of thoughts and feelings that maybe we've all brushed up against, things like envy and shame and performative happiness. The writing style is unique as well. The stories are told through emails and Reddit threads and text chains and comment sections. It's not all written in that way, but there's a lot of that, kind of like just sprinkled in here and there to make it feel, authentic. And because it feels so real, it makes you cringe even more. I really liked it. The next book that I read was such a unique sci-fi. There is no Anti-Memetics Division by QNTM. This is possibly going to be the hardest book to describe that I've ever spoken about on this channel. It's sort of trippy and confusing. It's scary in places. It felt as though my brain was dripping like soup between my fingers as I read this. And so I'm going to do my best to tell you about it. So I think the best place to start is where this all began. Back in 2007, in real life, we're talking about now, not in the book, a strange post appeared online, and it was called SCP-173. And it was written in this sort of cold, bureaucratic language, and it described a living statue that only moved when no one was looking. And in this document, it laid out the strict containment procedures, like always having 3 people in the room so that someone's eyes were always on it at all times. And if this sounds familiar, I think Doctor Who fans might think that, oh, I think I've heard of this before. It was because of the way that the post was formatted that it sort of like read like a leaked government document, and people just loved it because it was creepy, it was clever, it was in a way like a brand new way to share bite-sized horror. And soon other people started joining in on the fun and creating their own SCP files. Like there was SCP-087, which is an endless stairwell where you can hear a child crying, but you can never reach the bottom, no matter how far down you go. Or there's SCP-999, which is just this gelatinous blob that if you touch it, it fills you with euphoria. And then there was another SCP file about a vending machine which can dispense any liquid imaginable, like any liquid. And so around this concept of SCPs, which are just basically supernatural phenomena, that's what they are, this whole online world and narrative started to be built by thousands and thousands of contributors. Like you and I could write our own file, submit it to the site, and the community would either vote it up or vote it down, whether or not it was popular. And over time, this collaborative experiment just grew into this shared universe. And now there's almost 9,000 different SCP files, 9,000 different entries where people all play in this same sandbox of this weird fiction. And so from that sandbox, this book was born. And in this book, the SCP Foundation is this secret agency. You can, I think, compare them to Men in Black or maybe like the X-Files as well. It's their job to find these strange supernatural phenomena that exist in the world and to secure them, contain them, and to protect humanity from them. And then in this way, the world can keep spinning, naive of how close they are to absolute disaster and possibly the end of the world. The difference between the SCP Foundation and the Men in Black, I mean, there's a lot of similarities, right? But the Men in Black are focused solely on aliens, and the SCP Foundation, on the other hand, are sort of like focused on all anomalous. I always doubt myself on this word. Anomalous? I think I'm saying it right. I shouldn't doubt myself so much. They're focused on all anomalous phenomena, which is a bit more fun, I think, because the idea behind this book and behind all of the SCP universe is that Long ago, in ancient times, the world was just full of these things. People saw monsters and gods and strange creatures by the lake at dawn and miracles. And these days we now call them myths and legends. But in the SCP universe, they were real. And over centuries, the Foundation captured all of them and erased evidence that they ever existed. And so they took things like dragons and they turned them into fairy tales, and vampires are now just superstitions, and witches, and, you know, all of these sort of supernatural creatures that used to live in the woods. Now we just think of them all as like these old Nordic myths, you know, and they're fun to imagine, but they're not real. But in the SCP universe, they were all real, but now they're being contained and separated from humanity. So, like I say, very difficult to explain, but I think we're about there now. And in this particular book, it focuses on a very unusual category of SCPs called anti-memes. And anti-memes are these entities that erase themselves from human memory. You can't remember them. If you could remember them, you couldn't describe them. Sometimes you can't see them because they're self-camouflaging, even though they're standing right in front of you. Because these things are able to camouflage themselves by erasing themselves from human perception and memory, sometimes the people who work for the Anti-Memetics Division forget that the division exists because it's wiped from their memory. And so they have to constantly be reintroduced to the division and its mission. And that's where the title comes from. There is no Anti-Memetics Division, because very often the characters that work for the Anti-Memetics Division forget that it exists. And that's how the book kind of begins, with a character that is remembering where they work and that they're trying to fight and contain an enemy that they can't see and they can't name and they can't remember. And that constant battle against forgetting, against losing the thread of what is real, is what makes this corner of the SCP universe so unsettling and kind of scary in a way. So yeah, I've done my best to explain what this book is. Like I say, it's difficult, right? Hopefully you get what I'm saying. The lead character in this book is an agent named Marion Wheeler. She is this cold, calculating and introspective agent. She has to be that way in order to think of strategic ways to sort of like compartmentalize her thoughts in order to fight against the anti-memes. Very often her memory gets wiped and she'll forget a lot of relevant details of what she's supposed to be doing and what her mission is. And then she has to sort of like piece it all together again through context clues. It's a little bit like the movie Memento. If you've seen that movie, it's one of those strange occasions where we as the reader very often in scenes know more than the characters of what is happening. And in her head, she's just got this library of forgotten things that she has to constantly go back to sort of retrace her steps. One of the coolest really like meta elements of the story is how Marion and the other characters, the other agents that work for the Anti-Memetics Division, has to sort of like interact with the SCP database. So in the book, they'll very often like pick up their phone and go onto the SCP database and kind of scroll through all of the records and the files, looking up the SCP numbers to figure out the anomaly that they're dealing with in this moment. And what they're actually looking at is the same SCP wiki page, the one that has been created that I mentioned at the beginning, full of like that thousands of fans have compiled and built online. They're literally tapping into the same archive that readers of the book can go into and browse themselves. And so I thought that was fun. It sort of like blurred the lines between the fictional universe and the real community that's been created by these fans. The major villain in this book is an anti-meme called SCP-3125. I sort of don't want to tell you too much about this thing because really the joy of the book is finding out about SCP-3125 and its capabilities. I really like all of the different sites that the SCP Foundation has all over the world. They've got this like sterile Cold War government agency feel to them, which I think is so creepy because it's a real like stark contrast to the insane creatures that are contained inside of these like mundane buildings. The Anti-Memetics Division itself is really interesting because they have to come up with all of these different and creative ways of storing their memories and records that can be wiped out at any time. On top of everything else that they have to accomplish, it's a division that constantly has to remind itself that it is real, that it exists. Again, I'm not going to go into too much detail about it. I feel like I've explained the outline of the story without the actual meat of the story and without giving any spoilers. I'll admit that in some of the scenes, they were just really hard for me to picture what was going on. And so I wanted to just look up artists' interpretations of them. They were usually available as well because this community has such like a dedicated fan base. Usually I like a story that I can very clearly visualize with vivid characters that I can relate to. This book doesn't have either of those things. Sort of in the same vein as the House of Leaves or the Three Body Problem, the thing that people will enjoy about this book is not going to be the characters. It's not even really going to be the plot. It's going to be the ideas that are explored. If that's not your kind of thing, then you're not going to like this book. Another thing which might make this book a little bit difficult to kind of get into is that each new chapter starts off a bit jarring. Because you're seeing things through the character's eyes and it's not always clear what's happening in the beginning. Like an event will happen and you might think to yourself, hang on a minute, did I like miss a page or miss a chapter or something? But then it will be explained after the fact as we start to piece together the context of the situation. and it's funny, because as I'm explaining this book and sort of describing it, I know for a fact that some of you are going to be thinking, oh man, like, this sounds amazing, like so original. And some of you are going to be thinking, oh man, this sounds shit. So yeah, it's going to depend on your taste. The 8th book that I read is yet another book that I read on ebook. And that is The Saturday Night Ghost Club by Craig Davidson. I don't really have very much to say about this book. I know that's a bit crazy for a channel that exclusively talks about books, but this is probably the least memorable book that I've read in a long time, as far as I can remember. This book has actually made me feel as though I was in the Anti-Memetics Division. As soon as I finished it, I just forgot everything about it. It's about a kid and his uncle in the 1980s. The uncle is this eccentric shopkeeper who runs this store where he sells oddities like cursed objects and little magical trinkets that might not actually be magical, but it's fun. His uncle believes that the world is filled with magic and supernatural ghoulies and ghosties. He has a telephone that rings every so often with information about alien sightings. He loves conspiracy theories about aliens and Bigfoots and ghosts. And so together they set up the Saturday Night Ghost Club, and a couple of other misfit kids join in. And every Saturday night they head out to some location where an urban legend happened. And Uncle Cal, that's his name, Uncle Calvin, tells the kids the story of that location, and he kind of just creeps them out. And they do a little bit of ghost hunting. The first location that they go to is probably the best location in the book. But after that, I can barely remember the other locations and what was supposed to have happened there. I think that the title of and the synopsis feels a little bit misleading in a way. Like this book isn't exactly what you think it's going to be about. The ending of the book, obviously, I'm not going to say what happens. It isn't shocking enough for me anyway to make it interesting. Uh, yeah, this isn't one of those books that I absolutely hated or anything like that. I didn't feel strongly enough about it to hate it. It's more just one of those books where I think in a few years from now, I'm going to see the cover and I'm going to think to myself, I think I read this. Have I read this? And then I'll have to go and check out my Goodreads to make sure. So, yeah, unfortunately, that does mean that this was my least favorite book that I read. I think I gave it like 2 stars or something like that. Yeah, just not great. By the way, it was written by Craig Davidson, but Craig Davidson is a pseudonym for Nick Cutter. So this, if you've read The Deep or The Troop or anything like that, yeah, this is written by Nick Cutter. I liked The Troop. And so that was really surprising to me to find out halfway through that this was written by Nick Cutter. Totally different to anything else I've read by him. I guess Craig Davidson is just like, he's more like kid-friendly, family-friendly pseudonym. But anyway, yeah, so that was my least favorite book. But what was my most favorite book of the month? This is always the trickier part. Honestly, I really liked The Buffalo Hunter. That was a nice experience to be reading along with the PBJ book club together. I loved the original take on vampire lore. I loved There Is No Anti-Memetics Division. Really trippy and difficult to get my head around as I was reading it. It was a struggle, but it was worth the endurance that I had to kind of to put into and invest into understanding the story. But I've got to say, my favorite book of the month is this little beauty, Rejection by Tony Tulitamute. It's just so rare that I read a book that makes me laugh out loud at the absurdity of it. And it just had really vivid and believable characters, and that's really important to me. Now, here's the question. Did any of these books make it onto my top 10 reads of 2025? Just before I update the top 10 list, I'd like to thank all of my Patreon members for supporting the channel. A big thank you to the cult members. A massive thank you to the named men. And an extra special thank you to the quartet. All of you make this channel possible, and I'm so glad that we get to build this reading community together. Seriously, thanks so much for being a part of it. And also in these monthly wrap-ups, I like to pay a member of the quartet a random compliment. And so this month, I'd like to tell Andy James. Andy, bring it in. Come on, Andy, come over here, come on. I've got something to tell you. Listen, let's be serious. Andy, to the people around you, you are a compass, a lighthouse in dark waters, the one who points towards what's right, and the one who burns bright enough to remind everyone else that light exists, even when the night feels endless. You've carried burdens on your shoulders to lighten the weight for others, and when you drop them, you leave them behind as stepping stones, as a path to lead the way. Oh, that was good. People look at you and they see possibility. They see proof that strength doesn't have to roar to be undeniable, that kindness can be as powerful as fire, and that resilience exists and doesn't only exist when reduced down to myth. If you like this channel and you'd like to support it and get some perks like the Metallic Paperback Journeys bookmark access to some of the exclusive rooms on the Discord server, and also access to the PBJ book club, then you can click on the link in the description below. Okay, let's bring down the leaderboard and take a look at the top 10 as it currently stands. So currently, as you can see, before we add this month's books, you can see in the number 10 spot, you've got Roadside Picnic by Arkady and Boris Strugatsky, World War Z by Max Brooks, The Green Mile by Stephen King, Annihilation by Jeff Vandermeer, The Fellowship of the Ring by Tolkien, The Emperor's Soul by Brandon Sanderson, East of Eden by John Steinbeck, The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas, The Age of Madness trilogy by Joe Abercrombie, and the best thing that I've read so far this year, Whoa Mama, What a Book, It's Boy's Life by Robert McCammon. And so it's September, it's a little bit later in the year, so it's hard to get onto that top 10 list. But I can tell you that this month we're gonna add one book to the top 10 list. And so unfortunately, that does mean that we're gonna lose Roadside Picnic. It wasn't that long ago that Roadside Picnic was sitting really comfortably in that number 3 spot, but I just had a couple of really great reading months. And so unfortunately, Roadside Picnic, it is time to say goodbye. I loved you, but it's time to load up the book canon. All right, so let's take a look at the new top 10 list for 2025 and see how that's changed things. As you can see now, we've got Rejection by Tony Tulitamute in the number 8 spot. So now it's time to give an Amazon voucher out to someone who played the rating game for August and came closest to guessing what I would rate the books that I read this month. And the winner is, this month, from the United States of America, Brittany Burris. It could be Brittany Burris. I'm sorry if I mispronounced your name, Brittany, but yes, Brittany, you have won the Amazon voucher. I hope that you buy a book with it. Congratulations and good guessing. You're good at guessing. So that's going to be arriving in the email that you provided when you played the game. If you think that you can guess what rating I'm going to give each of the books that I read in September, then you can play along on the Discord. You can go on there right now and you can see all of the options. If you can't find it right away, the Discord is really friendly. It's filled with book lovers, and so people will help you out. You know, just say, hello everyone, how do I find the rating game? And then they're just going to tell you. But it should just appear alongside the left-hand column there. So yeah, that was the month of August, and now we move into September. And as always, I'm going to spin the wheel to find out what I'm going to be reading in the coming month. If you'd like to see me spin this wheel for the month of September, then you can click up here to see what I'm going to be reading. Thanks so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it, and happy reading.